Socrates called it his Daimonion, a hidden travel guide who protected him on his journey through life by preventing him from doing something he was about to do. Socrates always listened carefully to the guide because, according to him, this voice came from the Deity. Is Socrates' Daimonion comparable to what we call God or guardian angel? Or does it resemble a mental radar, a function of the human subconsciousness? Could it be just another word for fate? Anyhow, it seems to be something invisible and hidden, but nevertheless active outside or inside ourselves, mysterious and supernatural as some sort of intensified knowledge. Whatever the hidden travel advisor might be, in all cases our powers of imagination play a crucial role. With the inquiry into Socrates' Daimonion, I want to provide new insight into our evolutionary potential, our soul space, and, with that, to emphasize the importance of an artistic attitude. Our journey into life's adventure is by sheer consequence a quest for self-realization. The long and more often than not exhausting journey may be understood as an inner dialogue, something that has to be experienced by the traveler personally. The quest for self-realization is not an easy trip, and undoubtedly we will lose track several times in life. We might even be thrown into the air by a tornado, ending up in a strange country like Dorothy in the film The Wizard of Oz. At such a moment we are lost, and it is of crucial importance to find the way back home. Nobody can really help us. The process of self-realization has to be experienced personally and, as it were, to be earned. The way back home, this conversion, is always in some sense religious by nature, in which the truth is like a promised land that has to be discovered. What we need, then, on the way home, which we might call insight, is a personal coach, a travel agent, who can direct us in delicate circumstances to the right route. In other words, we need a daimonion. In this lecture I want to investigate the question what the relationship between Socrates' Daimonion with regard to the notion of religious experience and the artistic process artists use in making new work. This question is fueled by an inquiry which started in 2016, exploring by photographic means in what ways the daimonion manifests itself as a religious experience during service or ceremony of various religious communities in the Netherlands, more specifically in Amsterdam. The main aim was to show that the daimonion is a sign of our evolutionary potential. The results of this study were brought together in a project with a publication called Soul Space. Let us start then with Socrates' Daimonion. What is the travel agent Socrates calls daimonion exactly? The voice of reason, the voice of the subconscious, the voice of God, the warning itself? Does the voice come from the inside or the outside? Is it the myth? The original daimones in ancient Greece primarily were local spirits. Some say these presences were merely a manifestation of power, vague and impersonal. The daimon was understood as a power which tied a group together, a life-giving force of a piece of land that was inhabited by that group. It was only with the poet Hesiodus, who lived from 750 to 650 before Christ, that the daimon was connected to a specific person, usually by birth, and that it determined for the most part the life and destiny of that person. For the poet Pindarus, living from 517 to 48 before Christ, the daimon was his personal genius and guardian, and Heraclitus, living from 534 to 470 before Christ, took things one step further when he said, "The character of a human being is his daimon," indicating that the character determines one's own fate, that is to say, one's destiny, a conception which reduces the daimon to a metaphor for normal psychic processes in a person. For 5th century Greece, then, the daimones were lesser gods, intermediate supernatural creatures who executed good or bad powers over the individual human being and their communities. Consequently, someone's personal daemon could easily be an evil genius, leading him to the abyss, or a guardian angel, protecting and leading him towards the good. Not only one person, but also a whole community could have daimones. The community daimon would affect the lives of entire groups of people, powerful forces in whose grip they were held captive. As a consequence, these powerful forces needed to be restrained and propitiated in religious habits and practices, including oracles and fortune tellers, animal sacrifice, foretelling observations of birth flights, and the interpretation of accidental occurrences. It was obvious that the gods and daimones, or the gods by means of daimones, provided privileged communication to the people. The people themselves did not get the opportunity to contemplate their own decisions, but were strictly guided from forces they had no control over. In short, we can detect in Socrates' time, 5th century before Christ, a mixture of beliefs. The daimon as a metaphor for psychological processes in a person, the daimon as a good or evil genius of supernatural origin, and an abstract manifestation of power. Socrates was on a mission. He was a religious man who, from childhood on, was equally influenced by predictions, oracles, dreams, and special revelations. Yet for him the soul was an insight, capable of distinguishing good from evil. Moreover, an immortal soul, choosing unconditionally for the good. Starting point for Socrates, therefore, was always the autonomous and independent human being, situated in the center of the world and responsible for finding one's own direction in life. Thus, it was his main philosophical goal to educate the soul. He urged the people to work on themselves and, being autonomous creatures, take responsibility to bring about the good in themselves. He was regarded a free thinker, a man who practiced meditation and was on more than one occasion caught in a trance. With all this and the reference to his daimonion, he was considered to be somewhat strange, a bit weird, as we might say nowadays, eccentric by his looks and most certainly undogmatic. It was said that he had a hypnotizing effect on his listeners, and he seemed to have a very special touch. He did not care for money or wealth. This extraordinary Socrates used myths to guide people in their imagination along a clear, determined path to a non-rational claim in order to follow the same path backwards and recognize a moral duty that records the content of the myth. Consider, for instance, the well-known myth of the cave or the myth of the soul in the Phaedon. We should understand the use of these myths in the light of the mystery tradition of ancient Greece. The vision these mysteries provide is the great light of the good. Yet, since this was a secret doctrine, one could only allude to it in an indirect way. Thus, myths were the public language of the mysteries. The powerful forces spoke to the people in a way inaccessible for scientific language, using myths which directed the attention to the inconceivability of religious experience. Apart from predictions, oracles, meditation and trances, Socrates found guidance in his daimonion, a hidden travel agent who protected him on his life journey by preventing him from something he was about to do. Socrates listened always carefully to this guide because, according to him, this voice came from the Deity. How exactly did this come about? The Daimonion warned Socrates to abstain from something he was at the point of doing. As such, we could say he got a negative travel advice from his guide. Whenever the Daimonion kept silent, it was understood by Socrates as a confirmation of his behavior. In this way, the Daimonion was for him always a warning voice in times of uncertainty, mentor in dubious affairs, guardian in danger and an assistant in need. For Socrates, the Daimonion was the divine revelation of the Deity, a sign of the god being a primarily religious experience coming from the outside, as well as a power which was connected with the essence of his own existence. It would be a mistake to qualify this religious experience merely as a mystical experience, since it was by no means ineffable for Socrates. Reason and the divine guidance for him go hand in hand to achieve wisdom. Apparently, for Socrates, there was no distinction between rational investigation and internal vision, between clear thinking and intuition. Knowledge, and this is important to underline, had two sources: reasoning and inspiration or intuition. Is Socrates' Daimonion comparable with what we call God or guardian angel? Or is it more something the parapsychologists call a mental radar, a function of the human subconscious? Can the travel agent be just another word for fate? Whatever, it seems something invisible and hidden, yet active outside or inside ourselves, mysterious and possibly supernatural, as some kind of intensified knowledge. Whatever the hidden travel agent might be, in all cases our powers of imagination play a crucial role. Socrates was not the only one with such a hidden guide. Goethe, for example, stated in his conversation with Eckermann that the daimonic has played an important role in the lives of all important people throughout the centuries, also in his own life. It cannot be explained through reason or understanding. He had to accept it as the limit of his experience. A necessary limitation connected to self-knowledge, and because of that with authentic freedom, that is to say with insight or what we could call vision. According to William James, religion can be understood as the total response to life, a particular attitude towards life, assuming that there is something all-inclusive and deeper than we can perceive with our senses, and convinced that it is worthwhile to draw our attention to. The visible reality is but a part of a more spiritual universe from which it draws its meaning. To be in contact with this spirit, whether we call it God or law or daimonion, is crucial for a complete, meaningful life. A religious life implies the conviction that there exists an invisible order and that the supreme good can be found in a harmonious adaptation to that order. Whatever variations of religious experience we can come across, this seems to be a constant factor. The different theories within religion do not really matter. The essence is this harmonious adaptation. This kernel has two aspects: the feeling that there is something wrong with us human beings, that we miss something essential, and that the solution is to be found in the connection with the higher powers. It is not proof then, but about feeling and emotion. By nature, we have the feeling that our lives and the world in which we live are unreal, that there is something wrong, that there is a gap which should be filled. Traditionally, this feeling compels us towards religion. By connecting with the higher powers, we can be saved from the wrongness and can the wound be healed. In this respect, religion offers us an additional emotional dimension, and because it provides a solution for the uncomfortable feeling, it plays a positive role in our lives. It gives us, in some sense, freedom of sin, of discomfort. There is more in life than we can imagine, and by embracing religion, we are able to live in a comfortable dependence of invisible powers. Thus, the basic notion of religion is freedom. Freedom or redemption means liberation and unreality through the intensity of the will. By consequence, freedom is to be found in choosing a course of behavior. In order to achieve that, we need to break free from the ego and find a way back to ourselves, back home in our search for self-knowledge. The philosophical question what we should do with our lives is a religious as well as an artistic one, as we shall see. The ideal philosopher should therefore combine the thinker, the artist, and the man who acts. In order to investigate how this religious experience is related to the artistic processes artists use in making new work, I want to firstly discriminate between ordinary and extraordinary religious experience. To begin with ordinary religious experience. Every experience of a human being in relation to one's God can be understood as religious experience. For this, it is not necessary to be affiliated with a particular religion, like for instance Catholicism, Protestantism, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. It can, but need not be, the case. Religious experience can also be encountered in a very personal way. Yet, most ordinary religious people will be member, out of habit or conviction, of a particular religious community. What all these religious organizations, each in their own way and from a specific perspective, promise is freedom. Being freed from fears and worries, from sorrow, from all the hustle and bustle. Completely free from all this. Muhammad, God, Buddha, Allah take care of all the rest. It is the promise of an all-inclusive journey. No need to think or act from thorough considerations. The specific religion tells you, this is the way to live your life. It's all mulled over. This is the correct way, the good way. Yet, is this also the right route for the truly religious man? A truly religious human being tries to find a way back to himself, to eventually find out that he has always already been there in the first place. The long journey was necessary to learn seeing just that, to experience that all necessary luggage needs to be carried by oneself, and that one is time and again exactly where one should be. This is the goal of the journey, insight in oneself, which is at the same time working on oneself. For this, the person has to embark on the trip stimulated from within. It is exactly what Socrates emphasized. Learn to think for yourself and take responsibility for your actions. But take your daimonion seriously. Listen to the voice of your travel agent who will lead you in the right direction, that is, towards inside. In a religious experience, a person is liberated from strict individuality so that time and space resolve, maybe even disappear. It can happen, for instance, during a prayer, but also after a more intense period of despair, searching and not knowing where to go, in which a sudden conversion always allows the person to experience a brand new, clear perspective on the world, an insight which is profoundly life-changing. Such an insight does not come effortless, but reveals itself more often than not in moments in which something happens. A crisis, an illness, a failure. At moments we are really desperate and ask ourselves, how should we go on? At such a moment, a signal falls into our consciousness indicating, you have to change your life. You need to try another approach. That is what conversion is. You are on a journey and got lost on the way. You realize you have to change direction, but which one and how and what are the consequences? You grope in the dark. Conversion is the performance of an aspect change, which will put everything in a different, new light. Socrates' conversion, for example, showed itself in the change from a love of learning to a call to educate. The conversion has to be experienced as a certainty. This certainty is the faith. The conversion has put to an end all the doubt, with the result of change in the way of life. What then about extraordinary religious experience? Psychologically, the phenomenon of religious experience is related with nervous instability, trances, voices and visions, melancholia, obsessions and fixations. There exist numerous reports of inner experiences by people who have struggled with something we would call a crisis of faith. These, as William James called them, genius religious, speak of an acute fire. Think, for instance, of George Fox. James discusses countless cases in his book Varieties of Religious Experience. Examples of holy or mystic people who, as James remarks, fertilize the world. They are the ones that show us the way towards new possibilities and the next development in the evolution of the human self. Maybe not everyone might reach the supernatural dimension of genius, only the ingenious religious. But in any case, for all of us, there is more life in our soul than we normally take for granted. A greater self, and in a certain philosophical sense, a different reality. It may imply that a religious attitude towards life can comprise forceful challenges, and that people with such an attitude, when tested, can arrive at remarkable accomplishments. The more life, the more the possibility for freedom. An important human being, that is to say, a human being who is important for many other human beings, is in some sense always occupied with religious experience, with the light. This person has crossed the line of cultural conformity so that he becomes religious. He has exceeded the limitation and steps into the light of freedom. Socrates, for instance, was a luminary example out of a religious modesty. Not he himself had the insight, but the insight came from his daimonion. Such a person, whether voluntary or not, by intervention of a tornado or some other crisis, has stepped out of the crowd, can no longer go back and becomes a spiritual example. Therefore, it could not have ended otherwise for Socrates than that his life came to an end through the lethal goblet. Psychologist Dabrowski studied the daimonic in the lives of important people who can be considered ingenious. He discovered that conscious inner conflicts create a conscious restructuring of different levels of the psyche by means of inner psychic transformation. Every step in the development within the individual brings about a lot of tension, inner conflict and struggle, nervousness and even despair. Such a psychic neuroses are common in excellent people. These neuroses provide the possibility to take one's life into one's own hand. In the higher psychic neuroses, there is the seeing of new things, answers to the meaning of life, a search for something new and other, separation into different levels. What looks like fragmentation and disconnectedness may in fact be a prelude for higher integration. It may be that before we can reassociate on a higher level, we first have to dissociate ourselves from some aspects of ordinary reality. Therefore, as Dabrowski says, creative dissociation may be thought of as a phase of higher association. The ordinary self seems to lose its autonomy through the control of a spiritual entity, but only in order to gain access to a hidden extraordinary self. Dissociation, often patently maladaptive, can also become a tool for creativity. Cesare Lombroso made a different comparison. He wanted to demonstrate the connection between genius and mental illness and declared Socrates insane. Everyone knows by now that this is the wrong conclusion. Maybe we better think of Socrates not as abnormal, but supernormal, with the temperament of a visionary. He united fruitful activity with a high quality of life. Socrates intuitively understood that there are limits to reason. Not all experiences can be rationalized or be an adequate guide for all behavior. Reason and divine guidance, tuition, are blended and go hand in hand to achieve wisdom. And religious experience, we could say, is situated within this region of divine guidance or intuition. Socrates surely has opened himself for intuition by means of predictions, oracles, and his daimonion. As stated before, the fundamental notion of religion is freedom, finding the way back to oneself. For such a freedom to occur, a leap in the dark is necessary, caused by, for instance, a tornado which carries you away from everything familiar and precious. What I want to stress here is that this leap in the dark is comparable with the artistic processes of the artist when making new work. Every religion is grounded in the human feeling that he or she is a creature and the universe has a purpose beyond human understanding. Science has overthrown this conviction. The passion for knowledge has overshadowed the need for belief, and the purpose has become an internal drift. At that moment, a human being discerns the possibility to become truly human and recognizes the fact that the new instruments for a new existence are not to be found in weapons or material stuff, but in intellect and powers of imagination. Imagination is the key word here. Anticipation or even evocation of experiences. Imagination is the human organ for self-change. Therefore, the safest way to treat a neurosis is to create a goal, that is to say, provide meaning, conjure up adventure. We now have reached this stage in human evolution. We are situated in the midst of the evolution of complexification. This complexification claims a leap in the dark, a conversion, and the jump towards such a complexification is comparable to the artistic processes of an artist in making new work. In accordance with the differentiation between ordinary and extraordinary religious experience, we will see how this comes about in the distinction between ordinary creativity and extraordinary, that is to say, artistic creativity. We begin with ordinary creativity. All human beings have ordinary creativity, the ability to respond to sudden changes, adapting to altered circumstances, and to the ability to improve, transform, and remodel one's life and environment in certain ways. If this would not be the case, our species would have died out long ago. Although we can further differentiate the ordinary creativity in conscious and unconscious ordinary creativity, we will leave that for another occasion. For now, let us take a look at artistic creativity. Extraordinary artistic creativity is something that stems from ordinary creativity but cannot be reduced to it. Artists are trained in art schools in order to detach from the obvious that is normally taken for granted. This withdrawal is related to an ability we all have, the ability to notice possibilities by means of our imagination. The artist often uses this in a more intense form, associated with a sensibility for ambiguity. Then, the artist uses a delayed dynamic process to question the world and eventually transform the findings into works of art. How does this work? Firstly, the world is actively set between brackets. In this way, the world is being sidestepped and at the same time stepped through by the artist. Secondly, the wandering in the spheres of the unconscious is something much more passive and floating, leaving all possibilities open to come to the fore, letting them collide and in the end coalesce into something new. The delay, the time involved from bracketing the world and establishing the floating states of mind up to the moment that one becomes consciously aware of a new connection, is a necessary delay in the process in order for the artist to have the opportunity to clash together and mix up all sorts of knowledge, associations, feelings and experiences, and from this to elicit the emergence of connections. In the detached state, associations run free, responding to one another in an unchecked and non-linear fashion, seemingly meaningless. From this we can conclude that the artistic process can be characterized as a disorganized dynamic out of which emerges a self-organization that eventually takes over again. The result, then, can be something completely new. For the artist, however, the next step should be checking whether the idea is worthwhile. In what medium could it be produced? Are there aspects that need reconsideration, etc.? Now, within this principle of delay, intuition is the most important factor. An intuition is defined here as a gut feeling that is grounded in an earlier unconscious experience. It is a unifying judgment produced by our unconscious the moment it is ready to decide. In order to do so, it is necessary that it has had access to all relevant information. At the moment, little is known of how exactly the unconscious transmit this information to the conscious, and when the unconscious exactly delivers its solutions. But in any case, it is clear that it is an active and purposeful process. The artistic process can be transposed into a delayed unconscious thinking. Whenever we use this way of thinking, the information needed to make a decision will eventually be stronger. At that moment, we are capable to decide consciously whether we want to use and strategically bring this delayed unconscious thinking into action. In this way, the Dutch psychologist Dijksterhuis suggests that such a dynamic process is not restricted to artists, but, at least in principle, all people can make use of it when they are properly trained. This means that every one of us might acquire an artistic attitude. It is a way of life with the intensity of the artist and the courage to take the time for observing and solving complex problems, that is to say, to allow for thinking sustainably. The psychological mechanism of the artist resembles religious conversion, but with the difference that this conversion is an objective and clear perception without traces of belief in the improvable. The result is constructive willpower. When we take Dijksterhuis' extrapolation into account, we might say that we need to develop a positive consciousness, an open, happy state of being with a tremendous interest in the world, with the purpose to become a free, creative person. And, as emphasized before, this has to be something we have to establish ourselves. It should not be something that just passively happens to us. In other words, the artistic attitude asks you to actively take your life into your own hands. This is what Socrates already understood. In Symposion, He advocated this idea of intensified knowledge as a means to achieve instinctive unity with the universe. It is the attitude of the thinker, the artist, and the maker united into one person. In this poetic resonance, the mind acts like a radar station, able to tune in on thousands of different vibrations which are present in the universe. This opening up yields intensified knowledge, which in complex situations will, as a hidden travel advisor, guide one in the right direction, that is to say, towards one's own light of insight.